Hi, I'm Blair. I've been working in the games industry for about 4 years now, and right now I'm a freelance character artist. In this demo I'm going to be showing you my process for character texturing in Quixel Suite. I'll show a time lapse from start to finish and explain my techniques and decisions as I go along. Thanks to Quixel for asking me to make this tutorial, and I hope you find it useful. So here's my model set up in 3ds Max. I've triangulated the mesh using Turn to Poly modifier, and I set the poly limit to 3. I've got all my objects separate, but I'm going to select all of them and then export selected so I can see everything at once in the 3DO viewport. So just going to load in the mesh with all the parts selected. And then you can see all my material IDs that I set up in Max are showing up in the mesh groups. So just going to pick my textures here. So there's quite a lot of materials that I'm going to need to set up for the metals object. Just going to make sure these presets are what I want. I'm going to be rendering this in Toolbag 2, so I have my export target set up to match. The colour IDs I've just done using the lasso tool in Photoshop. I just use the normal NAO to generate everything I need. I haven't done any ID presets because I'm just going to sort all that out after I've got it all set up. And now that everything's set up correctly, I'm just going to go ahead and create the project file. So here you can see all my objects together after the project's been created. And because I set up my material groups, I can isolate those individual elements. Or I can see them all as one combined mesh, which is really, really useful. And in the mesh group you can see I can select all those and assign materials or smart materials to each one. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a smart material as an example. So for the main part of the body, which is the suit, I want kind of a latex plastic type material. So I'm going to go ahead and select one of the PVC or latex presets. So I'll just pick one, no matter what colour really, and then I can adjust the albedo to whatever I want. Okay, there it is. And you can see that's applied it evenly to every single part of the object. So I'm going to go and mask to layer ID, and then I can select that yellow area there, which I've defined to be the part of the suit that I want to be latex. So now I can only see it on that masked area, which is what I want. In the smart material I get the base, and then it gives me some damage as well, but I can go ahead and add in my own ones depending on what I want. This is the concept art I'm working from, so even though it's quite a stylized character, I'm doing more of a realistic version, and I want my materials to still be very realistic. So the materials aren't too well defined in the concept, but I know I want like a shiny plastic for the main part of the body, and most of what I'm going to be doing is metals for this character. So there's a little bit of fabric I get as well on the collar and tie, so I still want a bit of contrast with using different materials and different types of specular. So I find the preset is probably just a little too reflective for what I want, so I'm just going to go and just turn down that specular, and if I turn that down the gloss, I'm getting a less sharp reflection and a more blurred specular. Even though I want to use the realistic materials, I still want to tweak them just a little bit to fit with what I want to do for this character. You can change the viewport to only show the different channels, so if I want to look at the albedo, I can see that's probably going to overexpose, so I'm probably going to darken that at some point and change it to more of a like a mid-range cream colour, because when the character's fully lit it'll definitely show up as white, but I don't want it to look too overexposed. So I find it quite tricky to do characters with a lot of white on them, just because it's always quite hard to balance it. So this is the rubber stress, which comes as part of the smart material, and it's probably not quite what I want, so I'll spend a lot of time editing it to be exactly what I need. So the rubber stress shows up using the edge mask instead of cavity, but I don't really want it to be darker on the edges, so later on I'm going to change that to a lighter value so it looks like the material is just worn at the edges instead of going darker. I can turn up the normal intensity, and I quite like the effect of this because it gives your specular more of like a nice grain to it instead of just a completely smooth specular. It looks a bit more interesting. I'm going to spend a lot of time just tweaking these values over and over again till I end up with something that I'm happy with. So by turning up the texture intensity, I'm getting more variation in the gloss, which can give it a bit more interest because it's just kind of a large, flat expanse of white fabric, especially on the legs. So I really want to get some kind of variation in there just to make it look a bit more interesting. So I'm going to use one of these legacy materials for the tie, and I want more of a shiny fabric, so I'm going to use this silk and then modify it quite a lot afterwards. I don't want it too shiny because I don't want two shiny surfaces right next to each other. So I mask that to the tie group. So with this preset I get the base material and then some edge wear. The normals are quite strong, so probably just going to turn it down a little bit. But already, just without doing that much, you get quite a nice gloss with that tie. You can really see the individual threads, though at some point I'm going to definitely turn down the scale just to make the tiling tighter. I'm just going to mess with some of these settings, though I'll come back later and do this all properly, but I just like to have a quick preview and experiment with what the edgeware is actually doing, but I need to work on that mask, which I'm going to do later, so it actually shows up on more of the object. And I'm going to find a material I want to use for the collar. So this comes in really dark and the tiling is really big, so I'm going to take some time to change that after I've masked it to the right object. If you go into the group as well, it's got all the layers set up for edgeware and dirt, which I'm going to mess around with later. But right now, I think for what I want, the intensity of the threads is probably too dark, because I want the collar to be a similar value to the suit. It shouldn't stand out that much in terms of colour, but it should clearly read as a different material. Certainly want just a hint of tiling, really, just a hint of fabric. So if I turn down the intensity, that helps get it more towards what I'm after. I want more of a warmer value than pure grey. So I can see in the albedo view just how different the colours are there, so in the end I'm going to get those a bit closer to each other. I think I want most of the threads to show up in the normal instead of the diffuse. I like to make the cotton materials just super dark in the specular, just so they don't, when you're using a lighter cotton, for example, if you turn down the specular, it doesn't blow out to white and overexpose quite as easily. So you can see it's set up a dirt layer already, but I'm not going to touch it for now. Just going to concentrate on getting the base materials put down, and then see how it looks when everything's all together. So I'm just going to mask this one to the zip, which is a little orange section up there. That's just down the side of the body on both sides. Most of the details in this model are actual cut-in and geometry or intersecting, but the zip is just a high poly baked down onto a flat plane. I'm going to turn that to gold later on, but for now I just want to see the difference between the plastic and the metal. So going into the metals group, I'm going to find something for the gold. I'm not 100% sure what type of gold I want to use, so I'm going to try just a few different options and just kind of do it by eye and just see which one I like the look of that matches more of the look of the concept. I'm not going to worry too much about what exactly the material is and just kind of do it more by eye. There's so many options, and with like different saturation levels, that can kind of take a lot of time picking something out. You can see in the albedo that all the well, most of the metals always have just a black albedo, and then the colour really comes from the specular. It's probably a bit too dark and saturated for what I want. So in the end I went through all those different types of steel and just picked the plain one. There's so much choice and variation that I always just spend loads of time going through all the different options. And just mask that to the cyan parts, which is the plain steel that I want. So most of these metals I want to be quite, not super damaged, but just have some scratch and wear and tear on them. But just for contrast, I want the plain steel just to be very just undamaged and untouched, because it's more in the kind of internal parts of the character, so it's less likely that those areas would be as damaged. So I ended up changing my mind about this and just deleting the original one and just going with plain gold instead, because I really like the noise on the normal you get with this one. It's just a more interesting reflection, so I'm going to go with this for now. And you can see if I turn that up, it's just got a slight more interest, I think. So you can see the tiling's really big, so I need to reduce that. I've done all these gold parts unique on the UVs because I really didn't want to have symmetrical scratches. because the gold parts are quite a major part of the character, I thought it'd look really bad just to have the same scratches on each side. You can see them coming through there in the gloss. I'm going to use the good metal for more of the functional parts on the insides, because in the concept they are quite dark and they look a bit more like it could be painted metal rather than just bare metal. You can see it gives quite a nice contrast to the yellow, I think. So these parts of the legs, because it has had this kind of flexibility, I'm going to make these bits rubber. But I want to be careful that I just don't have too much specular going on in one area, because when I turn on local reflections in Marmoset, it's going to get really visually confusing if everything's just reflecting each other. So I want some more matte areas as well. I don't want these areas to be quite as dark, so I'm just going to light them a little bit, just so you can pick them out a bit easier from that rubber section there. So I much prefer that. The smart materials really kind of give you a lot to play around with, and even if you don't use some of them, you can just kind of go ahead and delete them to make the workspace a bit cleaner. So I spend a lot of time just kind of trying to figure out what each of them is doing. You can see a little preview in the mask there, but sometimes you can just toggle them on and off just to see what each of them are doing. I just wanted to use a slightly different type of rubber for those little studs in there. I'm just going to make them a little bit glossier, just so you can pick out the forms a bit easier. So if I hide the specular, it actually does raise the value, so I do want to keep it a similar value, but if I add some more glossiness, it'll just pick out those edges there, which is what I want, just to define the shapes. I find if I don't rename all my layers, it does get very confusing, so try and keep things organised. So with all the gold it's quite visually confusing, so later on I'm going to add some cavity detail just to separate those where things intersect with each other. And turning on screen space layer will help a lot as well. This is for the wires. I'm just going to do them quite simple, just latex plastic coating on the outside and just different colour variations. I don't really want any type of damage or detail on them because this area is already so noisy and there's quite a lot going on. I just want them just to be like simple blocks of colour that just you can pick out easily. So these are just UV'd completely symmetrical, but in the end I'll probably change the position of them a little bit so it won't be obvious that they're just mirrored. And because they're not going to have any type of damage on them, it doesn't matter if they just share the same UVs. They're just going to be pretty much just a flat colour. Mostly because they're just being protected by that outer piece of armour. I'm going to try yellow, but it's probably going to be a terrible idea because there's already so much yellow with that gold. It's going to look pretty bad, so I'm going to change it to black eventually. Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like that, so I'm just going to change it. You can see the reflection details on those gold parts are just really big right now, so I really need to change the scaling of that eventually. I just want less detail on that overall because I want the forms to be a bit more readable. So going back to my groups, you can see everything's coming together a little bit more, but I have a few more areas to fill in. I want to be careful not to use too many different types of metal. Just for design reasons really, that with like a character like this, she would only really be constructed with a certain amount of materials to begin with, so I want to make it all look kind of uniform, like it's all come from the same place with a consistent design to it. There's so much choice for damaged metals that I feel a bit bad just picking all the plain ones, but just for this type of project I just don't want anything that's just too noisy and too damaged. So I've made a unique group for these foot hoof bits, just because on the concept art they do just look a little bit darker, and because it's the bottom of the character I like to kind of have this overall gradient going from top to bottom, so I just want to have a bit more control, just so I can kind of change the value of the feet just to be a bit darker than some of the other metals. So I think they're looking a bit too chrome, so I'm just going to like overall just reduce the specular in these. So more of the actual local value comes through. Just adding a bit more contrast, making these blacks a bit darker. So on these earphone bits, it's one of the only areas with a certain type of plastic that I want that's still fairly shiny, but it's just a bit less glossy and reflective. But first I'm just going to fill in a little bit of the black triangles on the headband there. This one's quite a unique material in the character design. It's just, I suppose it's just to create a bit more contrast between like the blonde hair and the yellow frame. But I want that to be just a bit more matte. It's a bit too wet looking right now, I think. You can see the gloss is near white, so I'm just going to move that down to more of a mid-range. Let's go for the NES grey. Though I want mine to be a bit brighter. You can see it's quite blue. I want definitely more of a less cold albedo. On my colour IDs, I always kind of do them relatively similar colours to what I actually want the albedo to be, just so I can quickly pick it out without having to worry about sitting there finding the right one. So I also want the inner part to be the same material, so I'm gonna append the mask just so I include that inner section as well, but I just want it to be red instead of white. So if you go back into your masks and then hold Control and pick the other area that you want, it adds it to the mask there. So now I've got both those objects with the same material. But inside this group I can still use those masks to do different colours. So if I move this into the damage layer, I can change this to red. So it just keeps the groups a bit cleaner just by consolidating things by material rather than absolutely every single object having its own group. And then I can just mask to red. But I still want all the same gloss and specular values, so if I go and make that 0 on opacity, all that I'm getting is a different albedo, but I'm not affecting any of these other maps. So that's pretty much what I want there. There's a few red accents on this character and they are quite slightly different hues, but I just want to keep them a bit more consistent just so it doesn't look too strange that there's just 3 vastly different types of red, because she's going to have a little red armband there as well. The feet are getting a bit lost in the background now, so I just want to make it a bit more obvious. Just so you can really see the silhouette. So it's a bit easier to work with. So just going on to my last object there, just going to fill in a few steel materials onto this. Just so I've got everything coloured in before I go on to refine everything and do proper work with the masks. In the concept they're quite reflective, so it's not quite painted metal, so I'm probably going to go for something a bit more plain. So with the stained steel, it's more dirty than what I actually want, but I'm going to use that dirt later and come back to it and mask it to the cavities, so it's not just randomly on there. I don't just want a uniform spread of dirt, I just want it to be in certain areas, but I'm just going to ignore that for now. Come back to it later. But the material underneath is pretty similar to what I want, it's just plain steel. You can see under there it's also too noisy for what I want. So I'm going to go in and edit that. Find where the details are. So if they're on the gloss, and turn that down. That's a lot more plain, more like what I want. I'm going to turn the dirt back on, just get a bit more variation. I'm going to do those little bolts, a slightly different material in the end, but I'm just going to paint that manually using masks. All these gold variations just have varying gloss levels just to give a sharper highlight or more blurred. I'm just going to pick something similar to what I've got already. I think it's actually the same one. Just to pick out a few more objects that I've got masked off. These gun parts are also unique on the UVs, because again, when she's standing straight out, I just didn't want to see the same details repeated. The other steel parts are the little fingertips. I want those to be really quite plain because these are symmetried. So I've got just about everything covered here, just for laying out the basic materials. Then after this I usually spend the next 2-3 hours just adding all the damaged parts that I want. So I'm just going to add the armband there that I forgot about. Using the same preset as the collar. These fabrics are going to be a lot more readable as fabrics when they have a bit more, well, a bit of Fresnel in the shader, which will really make it look like cloth. But I think metals look generally really good in the 3D viewport. You can see the shadowing on this object doesn't really make it look like cloth, but in the end, when it's all set up in tool bag, it should look quite nice. The threads texture, I also like to put in the fuzz map that I used for Fresnel in Toolbag, just because if you use that thread detail, you get just a way more interesting effect when you turn on Fresnel, because you don't get the Fresnel in the recesses. So you can actually see the thread and it doesn't just look like a uniformly fuzzy object. You can actually pick out the threads. Just going to mess around with a bit of post-processing just so I can kind of see what's going on in an environment more similar to how this is going to be presented. I really like how there's just so many post-processing options. I really like messing around with lens flares, though they do kind of kill your FPS. But they look cool. I think it's quite important to take time just to change a few of these settings, change the backgrounds, because obviously your character's going to have to hold up in all sorts of different lighting conditions, so it's a good opportunity when you've got everything laid out just to test if certain areas are overexposed or too dark, and how it looks with occlusion. So you can see without local reflections, the AO makes it super dark. Just going to turn that down. So at this point really you could start throwing it into Marmoset or engine of choice, but I'm just going to mess around with a few of these. This one always overexposes my work, so I think maybe the light intensity is too strong on this one. It's more of a green environment. You can see the gold is just really going completely green on this. But everything's holding up pretty much how I want. But at this point, I'd know to go in and just manually tweak some of the specular values, just in case something looks really strange in a certain lighting condition. So when there's no detail in the environment map, then your metals are just going to look so much plainer. But I find the default one is pretty good just for all general purpose. So this is getting a bit closer to what I want, really. Usually though, when I'm just doing general work, I turn off post-processing, just because it can slow things down just a little bit, especially when you're painting masks. You don't really want to have to deal with that. But it's good just to kind of preview how things are looking without having to like chuck everything in engine. If you're not willing to spend time setting everything up, you can just have a quick preview. Okay, now I have all my base materials laid out to a first pass. Now I'm just going to go in and just start detailing and just painting in the masks more. After I've got everything laid out, yeah, I just spent just a couple of hours now just working on them and just refining everything to how I want. So I'm just going to isolate the body so I can see a bit more what's going on with the suit material. So I'm just trying to see whereabouts this rubber stress actually is on the model, and I'm just going to open the mask up instead so I can actually just view the mask. Yeah, Dynamask editing. So if I turn on show mask, I can see what I'm doing a bit clearer. So I don't really like these long stripes of damage down these panels. I just really want to isolate it more to where the seams are. So I'm going to take a soft brush and just paint out the bits I don't like. I want this area to be fairly clean, but not just completely plain, so I still just want a little bit of wear and tear. Usually I go in and paint. I don't really like leaving the defaults just for character stuff, because I feel like it just gives just a slightly too uniform spread of damage just for what I want for a character. But when I'm doing things like guns or other more purely hard surface things, I don't mind like the uniform look to it. So even when you paint your mask, you can still go and edit things like the edge detection, and it just keeps your mask, which is really good. So now I can see where this wear and tear is. It's actually the wrong colour for what I want, so I'm gonna make it brighter instead of darker, because I feel like when this material would be damaged, it would be kind of scraping off like the layer of specular and becoming a bit more matte underneath where those edges have just seen wear and tear. So I'm going to bring down the gloss. And try a lighter colour instead. So it's more like what I want. But I want the specular to be even lower. So more of a rough surface that would be underneath the shiny coating. Super subtle, but I just think it's important not to ignore those type of details. But I really want to bring out those seams a bit more, so I'm going to add in some cavity dirt. Usually with these types of materials I'll have a layer that's for wear and tear that's just on the edges, that's going to be lighter, and then the internal cavity bit will be darker because of the dirt that's gathered there, whereas the edge detection is where the shiny surface is eroded. So I want this dirt to be quite matte. But I'm just going to use a flat colour instead of a full material, just because I just want to avoid too much noisiness. And pick some of the Dynamask presets. Cavity set. So I think already it's bringing out those front creases quite a lot. Way too much right now, so I'm definitely going to go in and edit this. If I change this to cavities and just play around with these sliders a little bit, I can say how sharp I want this cavity detection, and again I'm just going to go in and paint out these bits. Usually I paint with the show mask visible first, and then I'll turn that off later on just so I can see a bit more how it's actually affecting it. But I really like the option to switch between both. So if I turn up sharp, you get the really, really fine creases that have been detected, cavities rather. But I'm just going to paint out these large areas. Just going to turn on undo, just so if I accidentally paint something out, I can bring it back. And it's still super harsh on the front there. But eventually I'm going to turn down the opacity of this. Just using it to define some of the forms that have been sculpted, just so they don't get too lost. If you turn on the headlight, it's actually a really useful tool so that you can spin the model around and you don't have to keep moving the light. So it just adds just one uniform light, but you also have to turn down the other lighting so it doesn't blow out completely. But this is a really useful feature. Just for when you're painting masks, you're not worried about nice lighting. I like the way it's just really bringing out those cavities, so I think I'm going to keep this. But you can see it's still way too harsh, so I'm just going to lower the intensity. Bring my lights back. And just turn that down. Usually when I've got this set up in whatever engine I'm using, I still go in back to this file and tweak this depending on my lighting setup. But it's so easy to change, you can just go back and do it whenever, really. So I'm going to paint a bit more edge detail into this tie. Looks just a little bit too flat colour for what I'm after. So when I show mask, you can see what the auto detection has given it. So really I need to play with these sliders just to enable a bit more. Just getting some wear and tear on the edges. It's really picking up the small areas now, but I'm still going to go in and just paint a bit where I do like it. So that's about what I want. Just make sure the specula's dark, knock down the gloss. Make sure the tiling is matching what I've set up for the tie itself. It's getting close to what I want, but I'm just going to add a few more details like dirt later on, just to break up that just huge red area in the middle there. So the dirt has given me quite a lot at the back there. I'm just going to paint that out. But I feel like there's not very much at the front. So I'm going to edit this mask for the wear and just make sure it's more visible. So it was a bit too dark for what I want. I'm just going to edit that. When you push down the texture slider, you get more of the edge or cavity detection instead. And if I change that to linear add, you can actually see it a bit brighter now. Just going to make sure that's similar to the suit colour. I've made the suit albedo colour just a bit warmer as well. So with this dirt layer, it's mostly concentrated at the back. So I'm going to alter these sliders just so more of it is visible, and then I can paint out the bits I don't want. If I bring back the tightness slider, then I get more of the texture showing through. It's made the bit at the back really visible, so I'm going to go in and get rid of that. I only want a slight bit of dirt just to break up the whites. But I definitely prefer just a little bit of damage. So I'm going to go back to the tie layer and just do the same thing. Just use a plain colour for the dirt. Let's try the dirt preset. So the fall off is a little too much for what I want. So I try one that's a bit sharper. So it's got the most similar level of contrast to what I want. So show more of the whites. Let's see how that looks. That really pops when you set it to multiply. But that's pretty much what I want. Just make sure it's a low specular. But if it's too low, then it really just starts to look like it's just been straight up just multiplied on top of the diffuse. So you still want to have a little bit of reflectivity, just so it doesn't look too artificial. Let's rename this. I'm just going to revisit this armband and just add in a bit more edge wear. Not really getting that much with the default. I'll try the sand, and then I'm going to edit this because it's super bright and intense for what I want. With the add, you still get some of the original colour showing through, but I just want a bit of fading on the edges of the fabric. Just to make the edges look a bit less uniform. It's a little bit strong on the inside and the area is a bit too big, so I'm just going to tighten that up. Turn on headlight again so I can see what I'm doing. Turn down the normals there so the thread will still show through, because I don't want this to be a separate material that sets on top, but just the colour variation of the original colour. So something like that is what I was after. So in the zip here I just want a little bit of cavity dirt, just to bring out the forms a bit more since it's just baked onto that flat plane. You can see this preset is a bit too random for what I want. Just going to get rid of that texture there and just use curvature instead. Just going to check the lighting on this, just seeing if I get the right material read. I just want a little bit more contrast really. So by reducing the texture I get more curvature. It looks okay. So So you can see when I reduce the specular there, it's just immediately more visible. It just gives the impression of a bit of erosion or wear and tear at the edges. So back to the metals. This is where most of the work is going to be, because this has got the most material variations. Not quite happy with the tiling of this. I'm going to see what I can do to change it. So this is just plain gold without any type of wear and tear applied yet. If I change the tiling, that's much more closer to what I want. It's less noisy and you can see more of the forms. So I'm going to add my own material and pick one of these presets. I want some kind of damage, so I'm just going to pick a scratch. And make this look more like erosion and acid wear. So just going to get it to the right colour. Trying to avoid it looking too black. So I'm going to reduce this back a little bit. So when I reduce the texture intensity there, I just get more of a plain colour, but this is okay for now. I can always change this later. The mask is actually more important right now, just so I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to be using a few more different brushes with this one. It's a bit more specific what kind of marks I want to make. I'm just going to see what the presets can do first though. If I show the mask, it's not having a super obvious effect right now, so I need to edit the curvature again. Just going to bring these up, see if I can make any difference. So I can see it's picking out some of the cavities, but I just want this to be a bit more obvious, not quite as subtle. Because I've got a UV seam there as well. It's quite a tricky area to paint on. But I'm just going to try and reduce the look of the seam just by painting in some manual damage. Just reduce the opacity. I just gradually try to build something up just to hide that seam. Trying to make a combination of big and small marks. I want some kind of directional dirt as well, just under here. Just gonna add in a few more lighter bits here and there. Yeah, this area is a little bit tricky because there's two surfaces that are just 90 degrees away from each other, and there's a UV seam right in the middle. So it can make painting a little bit tough in in these types of areas, but I quite like the effect it's giving there, just like the directional damage. It's pretty similar to what I wanted, so I'm just going to go with it. And I want like a kind of drip mark type effect. So I'm going to see if I can do that with these brushes. So if I just rotate this 90 degrees. I can get the right direction. Yeah. That's pretty much giving me what I wanted. Just going to add a little bit more around these edges. If I go back to my original brush, just do a little bit more work blending these two surfaces together. This is just intersecting geometry, so I'm going to try and make it look a little bit more grounded and use the dirt just to help achieve that. This side's got a little bit more artifacting, so I'm going to try and hide that as well. Just by painting a bit more in there. I find when you're baking a lot of cylindrical or spherical objects, it's just really difficult to avoid artifacts, so I just try my best to paint it out really. It's not too bad with this model because it's got a really high triangle count, but it can be a bit of a nightmare when doing more low poly stuff. I just want to say with this model, she's, just for the body alone, she's around 130k tries, and I'm working on 2 4K textures and 1 2K texture in this scene, and my performance is really good. It's pretty much unaffected by that, so it's doing a really good job. Even while recording the video, I'm having just really good frame rate. I wasn't sure if there'd be any slowdown just because it's such a dense character, but it doesn't seem like it's had any effect. So I'm just going to break up this a little bit and just make it look a bit less like it's been generated. I feel like the masks do definitely give you kind of 90% of the way there, but I always just like to go in and just do things manually just to make it feel like I've done a bit more work than I feel like I have on texturing this. The edge detection does a really good job, but sometimes some of the baked details it's not going to pick up on, so you just want to go in and manually do that yourself. So it looks a bit crude and too dark right now, but I'm not too worried about that this time because I can always go and edit that later. I just want to concentrate on the mask itself. The damage brushes have more of a textured effect, so it can be nice just to get a bit more fall off. A few noisy details here and there. So I could have used symmetry painting for this one, but as I said, I'm trying to avoid that symmetrical look to these, so I'm just going to do everything uniquely, one by one. But I think it's definitely going to give the gold a lot more visual interest. So it's good to be mindful of your UVs and just make sure you're aware of what's going to share the same space, because you're going to get the exact same mask applied to everything that shares UV space. Which can be useful, but can also be a bit of a detriment if you've forgotten about it. So if I increase the brush size here, I can just add like a few specks of damage. I'm going to do the same on these leg sections, which are similar design to the arms, but the frame is going in the opposite direction. It's got a different type of tangent to it. So these parts were all built symmetrically, and they share like the exact same symmetrical forms. But I wanted all the texture to be unique. So I'm just using this dirt to break up that solid white line, just so it's not as artificial looking. You can see on the right there how harsh that line is. So I really want to break that up. So now I'm back editing the material in the mask itself. Bring it down that specular, you can immediately see the difference. It reads quite well from a distance, but when you get closer it does look a bit too harsh. I'm not going to show this whole thing because most of it is just me painting out those solid lines. So after the recording I do go back and edit a lot of this, but it would be very boring to watch, so I did not record that bit. I'm going to add another layer of scratches that I want to be the brighter part. But I want it a similar colour to the gold still. I've used the edge scratch mask. This should help define the edges a little bit and the cavities, which is what the dirt is doing. Going to make the colour a little brighter so it's a bit more obvious, but it's quite subtle, but you can see it at the edges there. I quite like the effect, so I'm going to stick with it. And the gold default itself has some really nice scratch marks as it is. So I don't really want to go too crazy because I already like what it's given me for the most part. It's going to reduce the intensity a bit though, even though most of those scratches are coming from the gloss texture. I keep forgetting about this headband bit. It doesn't look too bad. Just going to add another metal material, just kind of making my own. Just guessing really, depending on what I think looks good. But it's only going to be a tiny little detail in the end, so as long as it looks like metal. So if I reduce that curvature, I'll turn it off. Now I'm purely using the texture itself, but I want to change the tiling rate on this. And just have those scratches by themselves. So I can go down and change the scale in the Dynamask. Then I want a lot more contrast, so I can see where these main scratches are going to be. I can change what texture the mask is using, so get more of these really thin, high frequency scratches. But I'm going to stick with that scale and then just erase the ones I don't want. So this is really where the symmetry comes into play. So I really don't want the same scratches on both sides. But I think it really gives a more tarnished look, and I much prefer it with some scratches. But you don't want to just apply them uniformly in the same area, so eventually I'm just going to erase the ones I don't want. But if I push the contrast back, they just look a little more higher quality because the texture isn't being as kind of artificially compressed. So I'm just going to try and erase a bit from the inside there. It's quite tricky to get to because this is quite a high poly mesh. Though I could just paint straight into the UVs if I wanted to as well. But I don't really want to hide the painting window, so I'm just going to do my best. I've discovered that cylinder is symmetrical, so I have to paint on this one to erase it. I think I want most of the scratches on the outside, so that would make more sense. So something like this is okay. Trying to make them a little bit more saturated so they're not as dark or grey. But I think all of that combined together definitely adds more interest. It definitely adds up to make the gold look a lot more tarnished. So I'm a lot happier with that than how it was before I started any of that. And this is where I find the painting just really useful. Just having the level of control is really good. You do want to bring your own decisions into it and not just go with the generated defaults, especially when you have to consider things like the backstory and just like circumstances of the character and what type of damage and scratches are appropriate and where they'd be. I'm just going to check it with post-processing and seeing what everything looks like. And if it looks okay, I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is the colder metal parts. So I did want this material quite plain, as I said, but I'm just going to reduce the tiling on it a little bit. Some of the details look a bit too big. And just further lighten that. Just want to bring out a bit more contrast and value between those two materials. The gunmetal already has loads of nice damage already, but I'm just going to modify it a little bit and just add a bit more curvature. I'm not quite sure what this one is, but I'm just going to roll with it. But reduce the damage a little bit. So the painted parts is the more matte area, and you can see where the metal is kind of poking through at the edges. I just want to emphasize that a bit more, so I'm just going to add some of my own edits, my own layer. So I want quite strong edge detection, because those edges are all super thin, and I just like what that's doing. You can see with the mask it's really bringing out those edges, but it could probably push it a bit further by messing around with these sliders. Yeah, that's pretty much doing what I wanted to. Let's expose it a bit more and check it. But yeah, it looks okay. Don't want to do too much to this rubber, but I'm going to change the scale. That's much better. I was just looking a bit low res before. Just want a bit more variation though. Most of what I'm doing is just using pretty flat albedo values, and most of the detail is coming from the gloss. So I just want to experiment and test a few things. So I quite like those scratches on the left there. So I wasn't sure why that tarnish is so bright, so I'm trying to figure out what's causing that. But it turns out it is the gloss too low. So if I make that a bit higher, it kind of blends in a bit more. I'm really just checking to see if this looks good at all angles and lighting conditions. And the gloss has got quite a nice amount of variation, not too much. Just going to see what it looks like turning off some of these layers. But I think I want to reduce this a little bit. So I'm just going to turn down the scale so the individual pixels aren't as visible. Looks a bit better. Just checking to make sure everything's holding up. Just going to revisit this a little bit, see if I can get a bit more out of it. Just reduce the noise. Trying to find out where that's coming from. That's a bit better. Just try to find a good balance. I'm not getting much out of it, so I'm going to see what's going on with the mask. So because I've got AO enabled, it's killing a bit of the curvature, so I can bring that back just by turning it off. Increase the sharpness, and now I've got what I was looking for. Just more edge definition. These three bolts are all symmetrical as well, so I don't have to worry too much. But I still want them to hold up quite well to close-up shots. Took a quick look at these wires, but as I said, I do want them quite clean, so I'm just going to ignore them and revisit these feet instead, because they are too noisy and too shiny for what I want. So if I check the gloss, too contrasty, and the detail is a bit big, so if I reduce that, looks like a better resolution. Just need to kill some of this. It's a bit better. I'm just going to try giving it a slightly different hue. which I think works quite well. And just lighten up these edges. I'm going to try and make that edgeware stand out a bit more. But overall they're still a bit too chrome, so I'm going to try reducing the speck on the base material. It's a bit more like what I want. Try the reflection being a bit less sharp. That's a lot better. You can't really see it from this angle, but the bottom of the foot also has a different metal on it, so there is a bit of contrast there. Now we're going to revisit these. They look very clean compared to everything else, which is good because it means I've actually made a bit of a difference with the painting. This ear part here looks way too contrasty for what I want. So I'm just going to go back into this steel, check that actually is the right one, and then just lower the texture intensity on the gloss. It's quite high value, so I'm just going to pull that down. That's a lot better. The default earphone material has some quite nice grain to it as well. But I'm just going to add a little bit of wear and tear. The inner part is symmetrical because it's pretty much impossible that you'd see both of them at the same time on screen, so those are just mirrored. So I made that in the wrong group, so I need to delete this layer. Accidentally made it in the headband. Need to make it in the earphone. Gonna add any damaged material, something not too scratchy. It's super big. I'll try something else. So it looks okay, it looks a bit like chipped plastic coating. So the edge detection, it's done a pretty good job on those rings. It's not very visible on the white shell though. I'm getting a bit of damage on the outer rim now. I just want to reduce that a little bit more. I want a plain metal. So finally getting onto these wrist guns. They look in pretty bad shape compared to the rest of it now, so I'm going to spend some time fixing this up. Go to the right mesh group. Let's come back to that dirt that I ignored earlier. I'm finally going in to edit that mask. It looks super random. So turn on curvature. Get rid of AO. So I can now get cavity dirt instead. I still need to kill some of those textures. Just gonna experiment with turning them off. I think I want a little bit of randomness, but just a low value. So something like that is okay. We want mostly to use curvature. Yeah, it looks okay. So now I've only got the dirt in cavities. Just going to lower that reflectance. So I usually get sidetracked doing different things if something catches my eye, so this part is a little bit random. So I keep getting distracted with the base material. It really bothers me if something's not quite right and I have to make sure I'm happy with it before moving on. I'm just going to add another layer of damage. I'm going to use it on the edges instead. So I'll use an edge detection preset. And it's really picking out the edges of those there. So that was done quite a good job by default. Just want to add a bit more noise to this gold. Just looks a bit too clean compared to the rest of it. So I'm going to add some soot. So I pick the rust and then assign the cavity soot Dynamask. So it's quite subtle right now, so I'm just going to up the intensity. Add a bit more contrast and that's closer to what I want. I quite like how that looks, so I'm going to try and add it to the base gun as well. Just so these both have consistent types of dirt. Put up the brightness. That's pretty much what I want. Looks much softer compared to before. Just going to make sure I'm on the right blending mode. I'll try multiply instead. So I think it breaks up the shininess quite a bit. Just trying to balance the level of noise so it's not too much in one area. These I'm not going to worry about too much, but I just want to have a look what's going on with the edges. Just trying to get a little bit of visible detail, but still keep it quite clean. Just going to go into Dynamask to get a better view of what's going on with this. So it's there, it's just not that visible right now. So let's lower the specular and the diffuse. So it's a little more visible. It's reducing the noise slightly. So here it is with post-processing. That's with my scratch details, so now I take a look at the whole character and then pick out areas which I'm not happy with and come back to them. I just want to make sure I feel like I've done enough attention to detail and everything. So the feet, for example, may be a bit too clean, considering they're the areas which would most likely get damaged, so I feel like I could add a bit more here. So I just want to apply a gradient of some kind. So I'm just going to use the sliders to get it partly the way there, and then just paint in the bits I want myself. So I'm going to go back to the big soft brush and paint out where I don't want this damage. Just using a little bit of texture. A bit more high frequency noise. And that's pretty much what I wanted. Yeah, just a bit of damage at the bottom. So at this point, I'll save all these maps and plug everything into Marmoset. Do a few adjustments, like values of the albedo, just to make sure things aren't too bright, but apart from that, apart from a few tweaks, that's pretty much everything. So hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for watching the whole thing. I hope you like the end result. Thanks.